Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 4 of What If Naruto was transported back in time. If you guys enjoyed this What If and want to see part 5 of it, comment down below and let me know. I have created a playlist for this What If where you can find all the previous parts. Link is in the description. And also go ahead and check out other What Ifs in the channel. And check the description for the creator of this great fanfic and support them for making this fanfic. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content, it really means a lot. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. We will start when I say Kakashi continued. Ready, start. As they had the first time around, Sasuke and Sakura were instantly off, and moving into a hiding position. Naruto also duplicated his actions from the first time he took the test, remaining where he was, and looking at his future, or past, sensei. This time around, however, it was more because he didn't trust himself not to smash headlong into a tree, or impale himself on a branch than a desire to prove his own worth. Had he thought about it, it might have occurred to him that it was a good idea to do what he had done before, since it worked out well for him the first time around, but he didn't think about it. One of the ninja basics is to be able to hide yourself well, Kakashi said in a bored voice, his one eye half closed and his hands in his pockets. So what exactly are you doing? Naruto shrugged and looked around. It's not like you don't know where they are, he pointed out, or at least, I hope you know where they are, since I do, and I am only a genin. He glanced towards the tall oak tree that he would seen shake as Sasuke moved along its branches. Besides, I am not scared of you. Kakashi's eyebrow rose, but the expression on his face remained just as bored as ever. Naruto wanted to laugh and cry at the same time, as he watched Kakashi with an insight he wished he would had the first time around. The posture, the hand in the pocket, the half-closed eyelid, the slack face. They all worked perfectly together to convey his apparent total disrespect for whoever he was facing. It was no wonder Might Guy found Kakashi so irritating when they had their battles. If you aren't scared, then why don't you come get a bell? Kakashi asked with a yawn. Naruto hesitated for a moment, as he tried to remember everything about this first test that he could. Sadly, his memory offered very little information. So much had happened to him in such a short period of time, that he would never sat down and really tried to commit any of it to memory. What was the point when so many other exciting and memorable things were going on around him? He did remember fighting with Kakashi on this day, however, and he also remembered the painful and humiliating outcome of that short, one-sided battle. He was not letting Kakashi do that to him again. But if he didn't fight Kakashi because he knew he was sure to lose, thanks to the small body he still hadn't completely mastered, would everything else still happen the way it had the first time around? What if he didn't fight, and the three of them ended up failing, and being sent back to the academy, and were split up the next time around? How could he protect his best friends, if he never actually got to know them? Perhaps he could avoid having Kakashi violate him that way a second time, and still keep things going the way they were supposed to. He would have to fight the Jonin, but so long as he avoided the super powerful ass poke as Sakura so deftly named it, it wouldn't be too bad. Plus, Kakashi had once told him that it hadn't been until the Wave Country mission that he had really started to see Naruto's potential as a ninja. Up until that point he would been just another loudmouth who tried hard, sort of, but basically just screwed everything up. It wasn't that he hadn't liked Naruto, far from it actually, he hadn't been able to see past the jokes and apparent stupidity to see what a powerful ninja the blonde could become. Naruto supposed that as long as he didn't pull out anything too fancy or advanced or previously unheard of, it wouldn't hurt anything to show off just a little. It wasn't like he was going to use demon chakra, or summon a frog or anything. If he could impress him today, perhaps he could speed the respect process up a little, and take just a tiny bit of the spotlight from Sasuke, so that it wouldn't be such a shock to his friend later. It could work, he decided, but really, after the frustrating past 2 days, the annoying lack of control of his body, and the fact that people who would someday be his friends, or at least, respect him all looked down their noses at him, as though he were something nasty the dog had dragged in, left him spoiling for a fight anyway. Naruto pointed a finger at Kakashi and yelled, I am going to make you see just how amazing I am going to be, sensei. And then someday you will get to tell your little grandbabies that you helped train the 6 Hokage, while they sit on your lap wearing weird masks, their hit eye-8s covering one eye, and their gray hair sticking up all over the place. He grinned confidently, certainly more confidently than he felt, and cracked his neck as his muscles tensed, preparing to launch him into action, or a tree, depending on how well he concentrated. I will have you know that my hair is silver, not gray, Kakashi retorted as he reached behind him into the canvas pouch hanging from his belt, and pulled out an orange book with a picture on the cover of a young man chasing after a woman, with a larger chest than her shirt was meant to carry. Come whenever you like, it's been a while since I have taught taijutsu, but from what I have heard of you, you could probably use the lesson. Naruto smiled even wider at the sight of Icha Paradise, and the memories that suddenly flashed through his mind of his time with Jiraiya. He reached down into his kunai holster, and placed his middle finger through the rings of 3 of the throwing knives. With a flick of his wrist, all 3 kunai shot straight in the general direction of Kakashi. The first 2 that left his finger fell short of their target, landing in the grass a good meter before Kakashi would even have had to think about moving. The last came off with a little more velocity, but left his hand too late, and landed in the bushes way to the left of the Jonin. Actually, the only person Naruto came close to hitting was Sakura, who was left staring wide-eyed at the blade buried in the dirt right in front of her nose. "Sorry, Sakura-chan," Naruto called out as the bush shook with not quite suppressed rage. "Are you sure you want to be a ninja?" Kakashi asked, never looking up from his book. "You seem to be more dangerous to your teammates than you are to your enemies." Naruto scowled, his hands clenching into tight fists. "Shut up, Kakashi-sensei, that was just an accident. Give me a few days of practice and I won't ever miss again," he shot back. "I don't think even a few years of practice will help your aim. Are you sure you are going to be the 6th Hokage? Perhaps you should be aiming to become the 8th Hokage, though even that might not give you enough time to become competent." Naruto's scowl deepened, and his annoyance grew, despite his knowledge that he was being suckered into attacking. Being underestimated and looked down upon was one of those things that he just couldn't abide, no matter who it was coming from, or how much of it was made to provoke a response from him. With a burst of chakra to his legs, he raced towards his teacher, bringing his hands together as he called out, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." 5 Narutos leaped into the air, and descended upon Kakashi, who merely giggled lecherously, and turned the page. A single Naruto held back, watching as the others attempted to land a blow on their future teacher and friend. That attempt was about as far as they really got. 2 of the clones collided as they came down on him, one having misjudged his leg strength, and the other having just chosen a bad angle, and vanished in a poof of smoke, as the other 3 managed to at least hit the ground properly. The next 2 disappeared as they punched from either side of Kakashi, only to have the Jonin kneel down, and tighten the strap on one of his sandals. And the 5th met his end, when he sent a beautiful kick at Kakashi's face, but misjudged the distance and hit nothing but air. The momentum of the kick threw him off balance and he slipped on the grass, falling back and cracking his head against a stone on the ground. Kakashi didn't even bother commenting on Naruto's ineptitude this time around, he merely continued to read in silence. The final Naruto rolled his eyes, and dashed at the gray-haired Jonin, vowing to at least land one blow before the fight was over. He started out with a punch at Kakashi's head, which was easily blocked with a single hand. The momentum of the block dictated a kick out of Naruto, and he gladly obliged, spinning in the air and sending his foot straight for Kakashi's neck. Kakashi ducked casually, and Naruto's spin carried him down to the ground. "Damn it," the boy growled as a kunai fell from his holster. His feet hit the grass for only a split second, before he once again shot towards his now crouching teacher, one fist raised. It was as his fist started forward that he saw Kakashi's leg muscles flex as chakra was pushed into them. The blonde ninja's bright blue eyes watched in horror, as the Jonin sidestepped the attack and moved behind him, still crouching, his fingers coming together, as if he were forming a tiger seal. Kakashi had led him by the nose through the whole fight. His every stance, every block, every movement had pushed Naruto into the spot he now found himself in. Off balance, with his butt just asking for the pain it was about to receive. "Naruto!" Sakura yelled from the bushes, her voice terrified. "Get out of there, you are going to get killed." Naruto instinctively turned towards the bushes, feeling as though he were moving in slow motion. "It's already too late," Kakashi whispered from behind him, as he brought his arms back and prepared to strike. Hidden Leaf Ancient Taijutsu Supreme Technique, 1,000 Years of Death. His arms shot up and into Naruto's butt, lifting the boy off the ground for just a second, and then the blonde vanished into a cloud of smoke. Kakashi's eye widened. What the? The kunai that had fallen from Naruto's holster before his final attack disappeared just as the blonde in the air did, revealing a safe and unviolated Naruto. The blonde lifted a kunai, and held it to the Jonin's back, as he reached out to snatch a bell from his belt. "Sorry, sensei, but I am not as dumb as you think I am," he grinned. "No," a voice replied from behind him as the bell in his hand, and the Kakashi in front of him disappeared, "but you are close." Hidden Leaf Ancient Taijutsu Supreme Technique, 1,000 Years of Death, Redux. Naruto had only a split second to look shocked before pain ripped through his butt, and he was sent flying into the stream. As he sank into his steps, clutching his butt and yelling unintelligible curses that appeared as nothing more than bubbles, he could only wonder why he had fallen prey to the move again, even knowing more or less what was going to happen. He had never been one to believe in fate, but for the briefest of moments, he couldn't help but wonder if such a thing actually existed. Kakashi watched the bubbles on the surface of the water, until they slowed and then vanished. He didn't look away until a moment later, when he saw an oddly colored object begin to swim downstream, and towards the shore. "Well, I hope he knows how to swim," he commented just loud enough to be overheard by the 2 genin hiding in the bush and tree. "If not, then I might not get to fail anyone today." Sasuke watched until it became apparent that Naruto wasn't going to resurface, and then quietly made his way into the surrounding area, to set up his trap. Kakashi was clearly too fast, and too strong to be taken down by normal means. There would have to be some brains behind any attack against him. As he silently tied back branches and slipped a few kunai into them, he thought back on Naruto's fight with Kakashi. Naruto had been shockingly good, at least compared to what Sasuke had expected out of him. The fact that he could produce a solid clone at all was pretty impressive. To create 6 and transform himself to avoid an attack was nothing short of amazing. And yet, Kakashi hadn't been fooled even for a second. He would toyed with Naruto, let him think that he had succeeded, and then humiliated him. Naruto had been stupid to leave himself open to any sort of attack, just assuming that his simple little plan would be enough to win him a bell. He knew a powerful jutsu, but he was too dumb to think through his strategy far enough to actually use his jutsu effectively. Sasuke's lips pulled back into a smile. As he tied off another branch, this little test was perfect. Sakura and Naruto stood no shot of getting a bell, which meant that they would both have to go back to the academy. All he had to do was get a bell, and he would be free of them. The last of his traps secured, he quietly moved back to his hiding spot to watch Kakashi for an opening. The means of achieving his ambition was so close he could taste it. It only took a moment for him to see what he was looking for. Kakashi yawned and tilted his head to the side, rubbing the stiffness out of his neck, and then stretched as he let out another yawn. Sasuke drew his weapons so fast they almost seemed to have appeared in his hands by magic. With perfect accuracy, he let them fly, and watched with satisfaction as they hit their target in the back, only to have Kakashi vanish in a puff of smoke as a kunai-riddled log fell to the ground. Damn it. He knows where I am, the Uchiha thought as he scurried away from his hiding spot. Kakashi's flippant treatment of Naruto's possible demise drove a stake of fear through Sakura's heart. Was it possible that their jonin was allowed to kill them during this test? It hadn't said anything about that in any of the books she would read, nor had anyone told her about the dangers of trying to become a ninja. They would warn her about the dangers after she was a ninja, but not before. This test was barbaric. How could the village allow such a thing to take place? She hoped that Naruto was still alive. Swimming was part of basic training, after all, but at the moment, that wasn't really her concern. She needed to find Sasuke. After his failed attack on Kakashi, which had also scared her for a moment when she thought it might have succeeded in killing the jonin, she had hurried out of her hiding place to look for him. Kakashi would have figured out where he was at from the path of the kunai, and would be attacking him next, no doubt. If she could help him, or even save him, it was sure to do wonders for their relationship. She tried to remain hidden, dashing from bush to bush and tree to tree, but it was difficult to look for someone when you were hiding, and finally she gave it up for lost and simply hurried as quietly as possible through the woods, wishing she had shorter hair so it wouldn't keep getting snagged on low-hanging branches. Sasuke-kun, she thought as she ran, where could you be? And then a sickening thought struck her. What if Kakashi-sensei has already gotten Sasuke-kun? No, she wouldn't believe that. She couldn't believe that. Sasuke was the best. That sort of thing couldn't possibly have happened to him. Sakura glanced around a tree as she raced past it and stopped in her tracks, before diving back behind the trunk for cover. Kakashi was standing just a little ways away, calmly turning a page in the orange book he would been reading while he fought Naruto. She chanced another peek at him, and sighed with relief. He was still standing there, apparently not aware that she was so close by. Sakura, behind you, Kakashi's voice whispered in her ear. She glanced over her shoulder just in time to see the jonin form a seal with his hands, and then the world seemed to vanish in a swirl of leaves. Naruto pulled himself up onto the rocky ledge of the river and sighed. His clothes were completely soaked again. He would forgotten how much it sucked getting wet when you only had a few pairs of clothes, and what was worse, the water seemed to intensify the stench that still clung to them from the day before. On top of all that, his ass hurt like nothing else. Kakashi had long, bony fingers, and even though they, thankfully, hadn't ripped through his pants and actually impaled his butt, those hard fingers still left him feeling really sore. Naruto once again tried to think back to the first time he would gone through this day, and remember how things were supposed to go, but the memory was foggy after years of important and tragic memories being built up. He remembered passing, after seeming to fail, and he remembered why they passed, but the specifics were vague now. It had only been important that they would pass, not what he would said, and how he would act during each and every event. He was certain that he would gotten tied to the post for some reason, but the memory of what that reason was had been lost, or repressed, over the years. Fortunately for him, and for the hope of a better future, he was an expert at winging it. It didn't matter how he did it really, he just had to end up tied to the post. That was key. If he was tied to the post, then presumably everything else would work out the way it was supposed to. Kakashi would berate them for their stupidity, Sasuke and Sakura would give him some food, and then Kakashi would pass them. How hard could it be? With a strange feeling of impending doom, Naruto pulled his jacket off, twisted it to wring out the water, and then laid it out on the grass to dry as he sat down next to it. He rested his elbow on his knee and propped his chin up on his hand as he thought. He needed to do something to get himself in trouble, and while he could think of plenty of ideas for troublemaking, having spent so many years as a prankster, he couldn't think of anything that was sure to leave him tied to the post. Before he had a chance to figure it out, he heard Sakura's voice cry out in alarm from somewhere in the woods. In an instant he was on his feet and running towards the sound, leaving his jacket lying in the grass. Sakura. Sakura spun on her heels at the sound of Sasuke's voice. Sakura, it was coming from the other side of a large bush next to a tree. Sasuke-kun, she yelled happily as she hurried towards it. She pushed through the leaves, and then stopped dead in her tracks. Sasuke was on his knees before her, one hand resting on the tree to hold himself up. His left leg was twisted backwards at the knee, his left arm was severed at the elbow, and dozens of shuriken and kunai were piercing his once perfect body. Blood poured from his stump of an arm, the weapon wounds, and from his mouth, staining his clothing red and pooling on the forest floor beneath him. Sakura, he gasped, somehow speaking despite the kunai that had pierced his cheek, help me. Sakura stared at his broken form, frozen, as tears welled up in her eyes. Despite his pleas for help, she knew that his injuries were fatal. Would it fall to her to tell him that? Would she have to hold him and watch his life drain out of him? She felt bile heave in her stomach, and then did what came natural. She let out a loud piercing cry of terror and fainted. From a tree branch above her, Kakashi glanced up from his book and observed his handiwork. I might have gone a little too far, he admitted to no one in particular. His one eye scanned the area around him, and located the last member of his potential team. He leaped silently from his tree branch, prepared to end everything once and for all. Sasuke heard the scream as he finished putting the final touches on his trap, and rose to his feet. That screamed, he whispered, his brows knit, that was Sakura. Ninja fighting, lesson 2, Genjutsu, Kakashi said from just behind the Uchiha genius. Sakura fell forward easily. A disgusted smirk pulled at Sasuke's cheek as he shook his head. Yeah, she would fall for that, but I am not the same as her. Say that after you get a bell, Sasuke-kun, Kakashi replied with a condescending chuckle. Sasuke turned to face the Jonin, his body relaxed, his eyes focused, and his arms hanging loosely at his sides. Kakashi casually pushed off of the tree and meandered towards the boy, still reading the book. The strength of the most elite clan in the village, the Uchiha clan, he remarked, not bothering to look up from his book as he spoke. I suppose this could be interesting, if you live up to all the hype that is. Sasuke stared at Kakashi for just a second longer and then attacked, his hands dipping into both the kunai holster on his right thigh, and the one on his hip pouch. In the blink of an eye he would send 3 kunai spinning towards the lanky Jonin. Kakashi's Icha paradise slipped back into his pouch, as he easily jumped out of the way. Such an obvious attack is pointless, he chided with a hint of disappointment. Sasuke's smirk became more confident as one of the kunai vanished into a large bush, slicing through a rope that was holding back a branch. The branch sprang forward, launching its payload right at Kakashi. Kakashi's eyes widened in surprise at the trap as he once again leaped into the air to avoid it, barely managing to dodge the numerous knives that thudded into the trunk of the tree behind him. As he landed, he looked over his shoulder to see Sasuke already spinning towards him. This time there would be no dodging, and Kakashi was forced to bring up his arm, to block the kick aimed at his head. Kakashi brought up his free hand to grab the boy's leg and toss him, but Sasuke was already twisting in the air, his fist preparing to come down on the Jonin's head. Kakashi blocking arm shot up, and caught Sasuke's fist, only to have the Uchiha continue twisting, and bring his other leg up for a kick. Thinking quickly, Kakashi raised Sasuke up by his trapped hand and foot, using his forearms to block the kick. The move brought Sasuke's face just a few centimeters from his own, and allowed him to see the boy's triumphant smile, as the only frail limb between the two of them, Sasuke's left hand, shot towards the bells dangling from Kakashi's belt. This kid is just a genin. Kakashi marveled as Sasuke's full trap was finally revealed. To have thought so far ahead would be impressive in a chunin, in a genin fresh out of the academy it was incredible. Plus Sasuke's taijutsu was not that of a genin at all. Even still, he wasn't good enough yet. Kakashi pushed his arms forward, and shifted his hips back, moving the young ninja away from him. Sasuke's fingertip grazed one of the bells, causing it to ring softly, but he wasn't close enough to get a hold of it. With the danger averted, Kakashi tossed Sasuke away from him. I am impressed, the Jonin commented offhandedly. I didn't even have time to read my book. I will acknowledge that you are different from Sakura and you got much closer than Naruto. Even as he offered the compliment, there was something in his voice that said he wasn't really any more impressed with Sasuke than he was with Naruto or Sakura, and Sasuke didn't miss it. With a snarl, his fingers flew through several seals, ending on Tiger as he took a deep breath and said, Fire style. Fireball jutsu. Kakashi gasped. There was no way a genin should have enough chakra to use the jutsu. The enormous fireball that erupted from Sasuke's mouth a second later, however, proved that at least one genin was fully capable of using it. As the flames died down, all that was left of the spot Kakashi had been standing was a smoking crater lined with hardened, black stone and burned grass. He's gone, Sasuke realized as he began looking around frantically for his adversary. Where is he? To the side? No, above. Below you, Kakashi's voice answered his silent question as the ground beneath Sasuke shifted and a hand shot out of it. Earth Style, Headhunter Jutsu. Sasuke managed one small cry of alarm before he was sucked into the ground up to his neck. Ninja Fighting, Lesson Number 3. Ninjutsu, Kakashi said with a smile as he knelt next to the trapped genin. Well, you are already heads above the others in this area. He gave the boy's head a condescending little pat, mussed his dark hair, and then wandered off, fetching his book from his pouch as he walked away. You know, he added over his should, just before he vanished from sight. They say an exposed nail should be hammered in. I'd be careful, if I were you. Damn you, Sasuke grumbled, struggling to pull himself free. Naruto fell into 2 bushes, tripped over an exposed tree root, and, while attempting to lean against a tree after one of those incidents, misjudged the length of his arm, and slammed the side of his head into the tree, before he finally found Sakura. He was more beat up after a short jog through the forest than he was after his beatings from both Kakashi and Sakura. He would wanted to get to her quickly, and was still trying to remember either what he had done to get himself tied to the tree the first time he would live through this day, or come up with something that he could do that would end with the same results, and had not been paying attention to his movements. Once again his mind proved that on a subconscious level, it couldn't remember that he was a short 12-year-old boy, and not the tall man he would eventually become. As he picked himself up from the ground for the 5th time and wiped his scratched hands against his pants to clear the blood, he found himself wishing that Sakura was her future self. But for no other reason than the fact that she could heal the scrapes and bruises that now covered his body quicker than even the Kyuubi's rejuvenating powers would. Sadly, she was not that person yet, but one day she would be, hopefully. For the time being, however, she was unconscious and seemed to be foaming at the mouth, her body twitching every couple of seconds. Naruto was pretty certain he hadn't seen this the first time around, as Sakura was decidedly unattractive at the moment, and she would just about always been the ideal by which he judged all other women. If he would seen this side of her then, he might have rethought his measuring stick. Sakura-chan, he whispered, giving her a little shake. Sakura-chan, are you alright? Sakura mumbled something, and then her eyes snapped open, and she sat up, driving her forehead into Naruto's nose. Ow, she exclaimed. Damn it, Naruto. What the hell were you doing, Sasuke-kun? She began to look around frantically. Sasuke-kun, don't die and leave me behind. Where are you? What are you telling you? Naruto asked while massaging her nose. Sakura's oversized forehead packed quite the punch. Sakura grabbed him by the shoulders and, apparently forgetting that it was his nose she injured and not his ears, yelled, Have you seen Sasuke-kun? He was right over there, he was. A shudder ran through her body at the memory, and she turned and once again called out, Sasuke-kun. Naruto looked from her wild eyes to the spot she would point it to, and then back to her face once again. He wasn't sure what she was going on about, but Kakashi was most likely involved. Sakura-chan, Sasuke will be fine wherever he is. Kakashi-sensei is just testing us, he won't hurt us. No? Sakura yelled, working herself into hysterics. He was, oh god, Sasuke-kun is going to die unless we. This time it was Naruto's turn to grab her by the shoulders and shake her. He's fine, Sakura-chan, believe me. She didn't bother to answer as she continued to turn her head and look around frantically. Sakura-chan, Naruto started, realizing that with them alone he could apologize for his earlier words without making too much of a big deal about it, about what I said yesterday, and this morning, well, I am. Sakura wasn't listening. Instead she pushed him roughly aside, sending him tumbling headlong into a thorny bush, and then ran off into the woods as she called out for Sasuke again. Naruto gingerly pulled himself from the bush and started to go after her, but in his haste, he forgot to be conscious of his changed height, and once again found himself face first on the ground. This sucks, he grumbled as he sat up and ran his fingers through his too short hair. It only took Sakura a moment of running headlong through the forest to find Sasuke, still stuck up to his neck in the ground. The two stared at each other for a moment, and then Sakura let out an ear-piercing scream as she cried, his severed head. All Sasuke could do was roll his eyes as she collapsed to the ground in a dead faint, and then went back to wiggling free of his dirt prison. 2 or 3 minutes later he would created enough space to pull out one of his arms, and after that it was only another minute before his whole body was once again above ground, dirty and covered in scratches, but otherwise just fine. As he brushed the dirt from his clothes he eyed Sakura's prone form. With a sigh, he decided he couldn't just leave her laying there and walked over, and gave her a small nudge. Hey, wake up. Sakura's green eyes fluttered open a second later. Sasuke-kun? She asked in a dazed voice as her eyes slowly focused on him. Sasuke-kun. In an instant she was up, and her arms were tightly wrapped around his neck as her face buried itself in his chest. You are alright, she cried as her body shook with emotion. Sasuke's shock was enough to hold him in place for a moment, before he began quickly trying to push her away. What are you doing? Stop it. Don't hug me. It took some time, but eventually she released him and stepped back, clearly embarrassed by her outburst and the spontaneous hug. Sorry, she whispered as she blushed and looked down at the ground, her fingers nervously pulling at a small twig that had become tangled in her hair during one of her fainting sessions. Whatever, Sasuke sighed dismissively. He glanced up at the sky, and scowled at the sun hanging almost directly above them. It's almost noon, he noted as he started to walk away. I am going. You're still going to try to get the bell? Sakura asked in bewilderment. I already touched it. Next time I will get it. Sakura's already immense awe at the Uchiha's abilities went up a couple of notches. Wow, you're incredible, Sasuke-kun. And then somewhere in her mind a voice reminded her that if she didn't get one of those bells, and she was sure there was no way she would, and Sasuke did, she would be sent back to the academy, while he would become a full-fledged ninja. You know, she said in an offhand voice, there isn't all that much time left. We, don't really have to push ourselves too hard. I mean, there's always, you know, next time, right? Sasuke's eyes narrowed and his gaze filled with loathing before he turned and walked away from her. For the second time in as many days, Sakura wished the ground would open up and swallow her. It seemed that every conversation she would ever had with him, which admittedly was only those she would had with him yesterday and today, ended with him finding her annoying. After taking a few steps, Sasuke stopped and looked down. There's a man I have to kill, he said quietly. Sakura wasn't sure what he meant, but her heart leapt just from the fact that he was still willing to talk to her. Do you mean Kakashi-sensei? As Sasuke heard her, he didn't show it. That time he left me crying. Crying? His voice trailed off again, and this time he didn't seem to want to say anything more. What do you mean, Sasuke-kun? Sakura asked cautiously. For that one brief moment, even though she couldn't see his face, Sasuke actually looked vulnerable. It was something she would never seen before, and she couldn't help but wonder if anyone else had either. I am an Avenger, he replied, turning back towards her, his eyes suddenly burning with emotions that had risen to the surface. I have to become stronger than that man. I can't just stay around here and whatever he was going to say was cut off by the sound of a bell ringing in the distance. Damn, the dark-haired boy swore as he looked towards the sound. I wasted too much time with you. Without another word, he turned and walked towards the spot where the three posts and Kakashi were waiting for them, leaving Sakura to stare after him in confusion. 10 minutes later, Naruto and Sasuke were sitting on the ground between the posts. Sakura was tied to the middle post, and Kakashi was standing in front of them. Just behind him there was a circle of bricks that had been set in the ground surrounding the stone monument they had seen earlier. You guys look hungry, the Jonin remarked casually, his one eye lazily shifting from face to face. Would Sakura-chan get tied up? Naruto asked, leaving his next question, why her and not me, to himself. Well, I suppose technically all of you should be tied to these posts, since none of you managed to get a bell, but two of you at least tried and weren't completely inept. Plus, I am feeling generous today, so I am rewarding your efforts. Sakura-chan, on the other hand, barely even saw me, so she doesn't get a reward. Sakura's face burned with humiliation and she wanted to cry. It was bad enough that Sasuke had to see her fail like this, but to be outdone by Naruto too. It was almost too much shame for her to handle. Her nightmares from the previous night suddenly looked less like bad dreams and more like premonitions. Now then, about the training, Kakashi continued, oblivious to her discomfort, there's clearly no need for you three to go back to the academy. The Jonin eyed each of his potential pupils, watching them go through the usual emotions. Sasuke scowled, but seemed to have expected as much, no doubt aware of just how good he was. Sakura was surprised and delighted, which wasn't surprising since she didn't do anything. And Naruto just sat there, looking neither surprised nor pleased. It was almost as if he was waiting for the hammer to fall. Kakashi shook this idea away just as quickly as he had the thought that the blonde had known about the reason for the no-eating suggestion. Naruto would have no way of knowing how this test was supposed to go, nor could he have possibly guessed what was coming next. He was probably just tired, and hungry and more interested in food, or the cute girl tied to the post next to him, than in what his instructor was telling him. That was, after all, the way the academy instructors had described him. So then, Sakura said excitedly, all three of us. Kakashi smiled through his mask. Yup. All three of you should quit as ninja. Sasuke's eyes narrowed dangerously, and Kakashi wouldn't have been surprised if the boy jumped to his feet and attacked him. Sakura's mouth hung open and her eyes were wide with alarm. And Naruto sighed and picked at some grass, looking very confused, but not terribly alarmed. For a long moment, no one said anything and Kakashi wondered if they were going to be so pathetically complacent as to give up their dreams just because their leader told them to. Finally, Naruto, who still was showing the least reaction to the news, looked up from the grass his fingers were still tugging at and asked, why? Sakura seemed to awaken at Naruto's words and added, yeah. We couldn't get the bells, but why should we have to quit because of that? Kakashi looked down his nose at them and sneered, though it was probably hard to read his expression completely through his mask. Because all of you are just punks who don't deserve to be ninja, he replied matter-of-factly. Sasuke's jaw flexed, and the killer intent rolling off of him nearly doubled. Kakashi let his eye fall on the dark-haired boy, and raised a questioning eyebrow. That was all that was needed for Sasuke to spring to his feet and charge at the Jonin. Sasuke-kun, Sakura cried out, struggling against the rope that bound her. The words were scarcely out of her mouth before it was all over. Sasuke's arm was pinned behind his back by an iron-tight grip, and his face was driven into the ground by Kakashi's foot, while the Jonin calmly sat on him. "This is why you are a punk," Kakashi informed the feudally struggling boy, shifting his foot so that it pressed a little more painfully down on his captive. "Don't step on Sasuke-kun," Sakura yelled as she struggled against her bindings. Kakashi glanced up at her and then turned towards Naruto, who seemed to finally be paying attention. Action was obviously more interesting to him than words. It was too bad he seemed so disinterested in what Kakashi was telling them. Unless he and his teammates looked beneath what was being said, chances were they would fail. Naruto seemed to have good instincts, given the apparently lack of training he would receive, if his kunai aim was anything to go on. But if all he was going to put those good instincts towards was following orders blindly, he was simply a waste of decent potential. "Are you guys underestimating what it means to be a ninja?" Kakashi asked at last. "Why do you think you were divided into teams? Why do you think we're doing this training?" "Huh? What do you mean?" Sakura asked in confusion while Naruto stared at her. Kakashi shook his head resignedly. "You three still don't understand the answer to this test. So, are you going to tell us the answer?" Sakura asked hopefully. "Geez," Kakashi groaned, "are you all really this dumb? Just tell us the answer already, sensei," Naruto sighed, sounding equally annoyed. "It's teamwork." Sakura and Sasuke's heads snapped up at the announcement, while Naruto looked slightly nervous, but not as surprised as he should have been. Once again, Kakashi considered the possibility that the blonde might have already guessed the answer, but then dismissed it. He realized that he would been doing that far too often for comfort lately, but, again, if Naruto had figured it out, he would have done something about it. Besides, acting as a team wasn't really enough, nor was it the complete answer to the test. "The three of you working together might have been able to get the bells from me, but on your own you stood no chance," he explained. "What do you mean by teamwork?" Sakura yelled in frustration. "There were only 2 bells. Even if we worked together, and managed to get both of them, one of us would still have failed. What kind of teamwork is that? This just makes us fight each other." Kakashi waited for a moment to see if she would work her way to the next logical step, but she seemed to run out of steam, so he said, "Of course this test was designed to make you fight amongst yourselves." At her confused expression and Naruto's apparent lack of understanding and/or caring, Kakashi added, "The whole purpose was to see if you could forget about your own interests and work together under controlled circumstances. We wouldn't want to find out you were only going to look out for yourselves, while on a real mission, after all." He looked off to the side and rubbed his one visible eye with his thumb. "Sakura, instead of Naruto, who was right next to you, you were only thinking of Sasuke, who was far away." He turned towards the blonde who had gone back to pulling at the grass. "Naruto, you spent half your time running around by yourself or looking for Sakura." He pushed his foot a little harder down on Sasuke's head to make sure he had his full attention and said, "Sasuke, you just assumed the others would get in your way, and tried to do everything yourself. Ninja duties are performed by the team. Of course, superior individual abilities are important, but what's even more important is teamwork. If you are acting on your own out there, your teammates are at risk and you could even get yourself killed." For instance, he reached into his hip pouch, pulled out a kunai, and wrenched Sasuke's arm to the side as he leaned over him threateningly. "Sakura, decide right now. Do I kill Sasuke or Naruto?" Sakura gaped at him while Naruto watched her curiously. His lack of reaction was beginning to bother Kakashi. The boy simply wasn't to all of the reports, as well as Hokage-sama's personal opinion, had led him to believe that he was. Naruto was quiet to the point of passivity. He just watched everything happening around him, sometimes with an almost detached disinterest. It was unnerving. "I can't decide something like that," Sakura yelled in distress, bringing Kakashi back to the here and now. Kakashi pulled the kunai away from Sasuke's neck and stood up. "The day might come, when one or even all of you are taken hostage, and you are forced to make that sort of a decision. When you are on a mission, your lives will always be on the line." He walked a few paces to the east and looked down at the large cut stone with several marble markers that looked like tombstones around it. The simple, elegant memorial seemed out of place in the wooded area of a training ground, but that was the reason it was there. So that those who used the training ground would never forget why they trained and who had come before them. "Look at this marker," he said in a quiet voice, his eye automatically going to a specific name carved upon it. "All of the names carved into this stone belong to heroes of this village." His friend's carefree smiling face flashed before his mind, followed quickly by the blood-covered version. That was the last memory he had of Obito. But the ones listed here aren't just any heroes, they're the names of those who have died in the line of duty. Naruto stared intently at this stone. It wasn't half as filled as the last time he would visited it, when he carved Konohamaru's name into it himself. The blank spaces on that stone represented the hope he had for the future. If he had it his way, few, if any, names would be added to it during this lifetime. His precious people would be protected above all else, no matter what. He wasn't going to see another name get carved on that blasted stone ever again. "This is a memorial," Kakashi explained. The names of my best friends are carved on it, along with the names of people's mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. Whole families have been carved into this stone, and more will be added to it in the future. He bowed his head for a moment, and then looked over his shoulder at his subdued students. I am going to give you one last chance, he said coldly, as if their failure to work together was an insult to the names on the stone, and, truthfully, he thought it was. This one will be far more difficult than our little game with the bells. If you are prepared to continue, you may eat one of the bento boxes. His eye bore into them as he added, but no sharing with Sakura-chan. Of the three of you, she did the least. Naruto and Sasuke at least, came close to getting a bell, but all she did was pass out. If either of you feed her, you fail the test right there, and I will make sure that any other jonin you ever manage to convince to give you a shot at being on a team will know that you don't follow direct orders. On this training field, my word is law. Do you understand? Sasuke gave a small nod, but Naruto continued staring at the stone, transfixed. Kakashi waited for a few more seconds, and then vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving the three by themselves. It's okay guys, I don't need lunch anyway, Sakura lied as her stomach rumbled in protest. Naruto reached out, took one of the boxes, and slipped his chopsticks out of their sleeve, but did not start eating. His eyes darted from the food to Sasuke, and then up to Sakura. Sasuke thoughtfully placed a piece of takoyaki in his mouth, and glanced up at Sakura who was doing her best to keep quiet, and not call any attention to herself, despite the fact that both boys kept looking at her. After another growl from her stomach, Naruto looked pleadingly at Sasuke. He still hadn't touched his food, and wanted desperately to share it with his future friend, but Sasuke was the one who had initiated the sharing the first time. That much, at least, he remembered. And Naruto didn't want to change anything that had worked out properly the first time around. Again Sasuke glanced up at her. Aside from the takoyaki he still hadn't touched much of his lunch either, but once again he looked away. Naruto watched him for a moment and then shook his head in frustration. Why was Sasuke acting like it would be harder to offer food to Sakura, when he would done it fairly easily for him the first time? She was a girl, for crying out loud, it was natural to want to help them. He waited just a little longer, and then gave it up for lost. He reached into the kunai holster on his right thigh, pulled one of the knives out, and cut a rope binding her, careful to remember that his arms were shorter than his brain wanted to think they were. What are you doing, Naruto? She demanded as her bindings fell away. You are going to get us in trouble. Do you want to split my lunch with me or not? Naruto asked with a roll of his eyes. I mean, sensei is probably a long ways off, and you won't be much help to us, if you are so hungry you can't stand, right, Sasuke? Sasuke nodded quickly and passed his lunch to her as well. There are some umeboshi in here, you can have them if you like. Sakura's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the Uchiha. Umeboshi are my favorite, she whispered. He merely shrugged, picked out another takoyaki, and ate it without looking at her or Naruto. The three ate together for several minutes, enjoying the food after having gone so long without. There wasn't much in the way of conversation, but the atmosphere was relaxed. Naruto continued to stare at the monument thoughtfully, Sakura continued to stare at Sasuke happily, and Sasuke did his best to look anywhere but at his teammates. Suddenly, the ground in front of them erupted with an enormous explosion. Sasuke immediately leaped to his feet, his hand reaching for a kunai, as he positioned himself slightly in front of Sakura. Naruto also was on his feet, but had reacted much slower and was less prepared to defend himself than Sasuke. Kakashi's voice boomed out of the clearing smoke as his head appeared in front of them, his face a mask of rage. Then suddenly he smiled and his face relaxed. Pass, he finished in a happy, nearly ecstatic, voice as he winked at them. We pass? Sakura asked in astonishment, her heart still beating hard in her chest from the Jonin's sudden, and rather frightening, appearance. But why? Not only do you pass, Kakashi replied, practically beaming, but you are the first to pass. Everyone else just ran around doing every stupid I said, no matter how dumb the orders. They were all morons. He glanced down at the mostly eaten meals and sighed contentedly. A ninja has to be able to see underneath the underneath. Those who don't follow the rules, or don't obey orders in the ninja world are called trash, but those who do not care for or support their comrades, even if that means violating orders once in a while, are lower than trash. Kakashi watched the information sink into all of his students, his first students, and smiled. Even Naruto was reacting the way he expected him to, whooping it up with Sakura, while Sasuke looked on with a reserved grin on his face. That officially ends the training, Kakashi said after watching their celebration for a moment. All of you pass. So starting tomorrow we will begin our duties as Team 7. Come on, we will head back to the village, and I will show you where we're supposed to meet in the mornings. The four headed towards the Hokage Tower, three very happy that they had managed to pass their final exam, and one slightly disappointed that one of his students had cut the rope, so he couldn't leave anyone tied to the post for a while, as his best friend had once been, long ago. Even with that minor disappointment, it was a happy day for Haddock Kakashi. He had again a team to lead, 3 students who had passed the test, where the all previous teams he would tested had failed miserably. On top of that, one already showed excellent potential, another wasn't as bad as advertised, and was proving to at least be interesting, and the third was incredibly intelligent, according to the reports her academy teachers had written. Yes, this was a team he could expect big things out of. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created, and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.